In the 1960s, the Soviet Union unveiled a vehicle that would reshape modern warfare. A steel monster built to protect soldiers, carry them into battle, and provide them with firepower and defense on the front lines. It was meant to be a game changer, a revolutionary force in the ever-evolving nature of war. The BMP, the first ever mass-produced infantry fighting vehicle, IFV. It could swim across rivers, parachute from the sky, and carry an entire squad of soldiers safely into combat. It seemed like the perfect machine for the battlefield. But now, decades later, the BMP is infamous not for its revolutionary design or the advancements it once brought to military tactics, but for something much darker. Today, it's one of the most hated vehicles in the entire Russian army. Russian soldiers, from infantry to tank units, have made their disdain clear. They dream of being rid of it, of replacing it with something better, something safer. And even with the newer, more modern versions of the BMP, nothing has changed. The hate remains. But why? What happened to turn a groundbreaking military vehicle into the infantry graveyard of Russia? In the early 1950s, the world was on the brink of a new kind of warfare. Nuclear weapons had changed everything. Now the infantry that fought on the ground would need to survive the fallout, traveling through contaminated landscapes. This new vehicle would need to provide better protection, more firepower, and the ability to survive in an environment where radiation could be just as dangerous as the enemy. Thus, in 1959, the Soviet Union began developing the BMP-1, a vehicle designed to meet the challenges of the new age. At first glance, the BMP-1 seemed almost magical. Not only did it offer infantry protection and transport, but it also packed a punch with its 73mm gun, a machine gun, and even an anti-tank missile launcher. It could swim across rivers, make its way through rough terrain, and even be dropped from an airplane. It was everything soldiers needed and more. But even with all its groundbreaking features, the BMP-1 had major flaws. Its firepower was limited, and the gun was slow to reload. The gun's elevation was too low to effectively target enemies from higher ground, leaving it vulnerable in real-world combat situations. Despite these issues, it was the beginning of something huge, a new type of vehicle for modern warfare. And for a brief moment, the BMP seemed like the future, but soon the cracks began to show. It wasn't until the BMP-1 faced the harsh realities of combat, specifically in Afghanistan, that its design flaws became apparent. The Mujahideen, entrenched in the mountainous regions, made life on the battlefield treacherous for Soviet forces. Soldiers in BMP-1s found themselves easy targets for RPGs, mines, and ambushes. The vehicle's armor, once thought to be sufficient, couldn't hold up. The crew was vulnerable. Even a simple mine explosion could lead to catastrophic consequences. Soldiers quickly learned that being inside the BMP was almost as dangerous as being out in the open. So they started to do the unthinkable, climbing out of the vehicle and sitting on top of the armor, hoping they'd be lucky enough to avoid a fatal shot. But how did the Soviet Union let it get this bad? How could a military power, with all its resources, fail to design a vehicle that could protect its soldiers? The truth lies in the thinking behind the BMP's design. The Soviet military at the time didn't anticipate infantry fighting against enemies with sophisticated anti-tank weapons. They thought their light armor and low profile would make them hard to hit, that they could use terrain to shield themselves from enemy fire. But they had underestimated the power of modern weapons and the tactics of their adversaries. In 1980, the Soviet Union introduced the BMP-2, hoping to fix the flaws of the BMP-1. It had better vision with night sights and a laser rangefinder. The 73mm gun was replaced with a 30mm cannon, which, while smaller in caliber, was more accurate and offered a better elevation angle for targeting enemies from higher ground. On paper, the BMP-2 seemed like the solution. It was a more refined version of the BMP-1, but still it failed to address the most pressing issues. The armor remained weak, the crew remained vulnerable, and while the new gun offered improvements in firepower, it didn't make the vehicle any safer to be inside. The BMP-2 did improve in some areas, but for the soldiers who had to live with it, it was still a death trap. And soon another issue would rear its ugly head: the war in Chechnya. The BMP's reputation took another nosedive. By the time of the First Chechen War, the BMP-2 had become a symbol of failure. During the brutal street fighting in Grozny, it became clear that the BMP was no match for modern urban warfare. Soldiers trapped in the BMP-2 found themselves exposed and helpless, easy targets for enemy fire. The vehicle's thin armor was no match for the RPGs, and the crew's chances of survival were slim at best. At this point, the BMP-2 had become a name that soldiers feared. It was no longer seen as a protective vehicle, it was a moving coffin. The BMP's nickname, the mass grave of infantry, became infamous during this time. And it wasn't long before the BMP-3 was introduced, promising to fix the issues with its predecessors. The BMP-3 hit the battlefield in the early 90s, a more advanced version that promised to solve the firepower problems. It came with a 100mm cannon, paired with the 30mm cannon from the BMP-2. But there was still a major problem. The armor was still too thin. The vehicle's armor couldn't protect the crew from mines or the kind of powerful explosions that soldiers faced in real combat situations. Despite the increase in armament, the BMP-3 still couldn't deliver the protection soldiers needed. And that's what made it so hated. Every soldier who had ever been in the BMP knew that the firepower it offered wasn't enough to compensate for the lack of protection. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the United States was developing a more effective infantry fighting vehicle, the M2 Bradley. The Bradley didn't have the ability to swim or parachute, but it did have something far more important: superior armor. While the BMP was still a sitting duck in battle, the Bradley's composite armor was far more capable of withstanding enemy fire. The M2 Bradley's crew was far safer inside, even when under attack. And that made all the difference. The Bradley's armor was a combination of steel, aluminum, and ceramic plates, offering far better protection than the BMP could ever hope to provide. Today, the Russian military looks toward the Kurganets 25, a modern infantry fighting vehicle that promises better protection and armor than the BMP. But it has been in development for years, and its future is uncertain. Will it replace the BMP? Only time will tell. The BMP, once hailed as a revolutionary machine, now stands as a symbol of failure. It's remembered for its promise unfulfilled and the countless soldiers who paid the price. Despite its advanced features, its armor, design, and overall protection were never enough to make it a reliable tool for modern warfare. For those who served in it, the BMP will always be the infantry graveyard, a tragic reminder of how great intentions can fall short when the design doesn't meet the harsh realities of combat. If you found this story insightful, like, comment, and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more military stories.